Second inning. A different brand of baseball. Negro League game play. We played tricky baseball. Coil Papa Bell, legendary Negro League outfielder. We had some white umpires from another league call our game once. Those poor fellows didn't know what to do with themselves. They made so many mistakes. They came over and apologized after the game, said they couldn't help it. They'd never seen our type of baseball. Said if they played like we did in the majors, they'd have to make the parks bigger to seat all the fans. We played a different brand of baseball from the majors. Negro baseball was fast, flashy, daring. Sometimes it was even funny, but always very exciting to watch. People would come early to the ballpark just to see us practice. We would whip that ball around the infield with such precision they'd applaud. We took pride in our baseball, brought our own style to the game, and named our teams to match. Called ourselves the Baltimore Elite Giants, the Philadelphia Stars, the Birmingham Black Barons, the Cleveland Buckeyes, the New York Cubans, the Atlanta Black Crackers, and many more. And we could play like we invented the game, kept the fans on the edge of their seats, turned singles into doubles and doubles into triples, just by running hard. We used Rube Foster's bunt and run game to perfection. They don't bunt much today, but it kills us. Some guys would clown on the field, throw the ball behind their backs and get the guy out at first, or play shadow ball, where the infielders would whip an imaginary ball around the bases. If you didn't know any better, you'd have thought that they had a real ball. That's how good they were. Lloyd Pepper Bassett used to catch some games in a rocking chair. Willis Jones used to take a newspaper with a hole in it out to center field and pretend he was reading it. If his team was ahead and the ball was hit out there, he wouldn't go after it. One of the other guys would have to kill himself trying to get it. A lot of our guys didn't like all that comedy because of us. Baseball was some serious business. It was our means of putting food on the table. But truth be told, some of that stuff was funny. There were a couple of guys, Reese Goose Tatum and Richard King Tut, who were with the Indianapolis Clowns. They had a routine where Goose played the dentist and Tut the patient. Tut would fill up his mouth with corn, and Goose would act like he was pulling on Tut's tooth. But it wasn't coming out. So Goose went and got a firecracker and lit it in Tut's mouth. As soon as it went off, Tut would jump up hollering and spit out that corn like his teeth were falling out. Had people on their backs with laughter. They would do the same thing every night. Most of that clowning was done in the early days of Negro baseball, before Rube founded the league. The teams that clowned were not allowed in the league because their acts were too much like the buffoonery you would see in the movies. Back then, the movies made full-grown Negroes look like fools or children, always telling jokes or dancing. Most of the time, it was white folks made up to look like Negroes. It was downright shameful. But still, people would come out to see Negro teams like the Indianapolis Clowns play. They were a good draw. They had some good players on that team, too. Did you know that the Major League home run champ Hank Aaron played with the Clowns before he went up to the majors? We didn't really know how rough it was in the Negro leagues until some of our guys went up to the majors. Play was a lot nicer there. In our league, everything was legal. We would do whatever it took to win. Pitchers threw anything and everything. Spitters, shine balls, emery balls, cut balls, you name it. They cut that ball into pieces and had curveballs breaking about 6 feet. Throw a new white ball to the pitcher, and it would come back brown from all the tobacco juice and what have you. You never know what the ball was going to do once it left the pitcher's hand. And throwing at a batter was common. The pitcher would knock you down just to mess with your head. Look up at the umpire, and he'd just say, "Get up and play ball, son." That's why the batting helmet was invented. When Willie Wells was just a rookie, he found the ball was making its way towards his head a little more often than he'd like. So he decided to wear an old miner's helmet when he stepped up to the plate. Boy, did they laugh at him. But today, you wouldn't find a baseball game without batting helmets. Base runners would spike you in a minute. Some of those guys would spike their mother if she were blocking home plate. A catcher learned not to block the plate if a runner was coming home. Get in the runner's way, and he'd step on the catcher's foot or run him right over, knock all of his gear clear off. Come sliding in with his cleats high. Runners could tear your uniform off with those spikes. Some of those guys would sit in the dugout before the game, filing their spikes, look at you, and say, "This is for you." Those guys were mean, and many of them loved to fight. Oscar Charleston was a mean son of a gun. He would just about go looking for trouble. One time, he snatched the hood off of Ku Klux Klansman. Judd Wilson loved to use his fist too. Many close games ended with a fight. We didn't really have any spring training. We had to learn on the field. By springtime, we had already been playing down in Cuba or Mexico all winter. There wasn't any break. Soon as spring hit, we had paying customers. Games would last only about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Not like those long games they have today, which can go about 3 hours or more. None of that stepping in and out of the batter's box or stopping to have a word with the manager. We came to play. The ball was played with was a Wilson ball, which wasn't as lively as the expensive ball they used in the majors. Could you imagine all the home runs Josh Gibson or Norman Turkey Stearns would have hit if we'd had that kind of ball? And we bought our bats straight off the shelf. Major leagues had theirs made. Umpiring wasn't always that great either. Some of those guys wouldn't have known a strike from their left foot. At one time, the league had official umpires, but they couldn't travel with the teams. It was too expensive. A few of the umpires were former players. Pop Lloyd and Wilbur Bullet Rogan used to ump later on in their careers. Those guys were tough. They had to be, with guys like Oscar Charleston and Judd Wilson in their league. At one game in Kansas City, there were 3 umpires. Rogan was behind home plate, and the other 2 were at first and third. A play took place at third base, and Rogan ran down the line. He called the man out, and the base umpire called him safe. They started to argue and got into a fight. Bullet Rogan pulled out a knife, and the other guy panicked and took off running towards the center field fence and climbed over it. The next day, it was in the papers. Rogan had a bad temper. We wouldn't agree too much with him about balls and strikes. We wouldn't argue too much with him about balls and strikes. Whatever he called you, you would just let that go. He was old, but he'd fight you anyway. Some guys even played with a gun in their uniforms. It was a rough league. And stats? Well, some teams kept them, but it wasn't a consistent thing. Most guys kept their own stats, or if a player on the team was keeping them, a bit of the information was lost when he had to bat or play in the field. Occasionally, a local newspaper would send a reporter out to keep stats, but the newspapers wouldn't pay them to do it very often. Sometimes those guys would come late and have to ask around, what happened in the first inning? Who did what? Or they'd just make up the stats. Even when the stats were recorded, they weren't always phoned in, or it was too much to try to stop and find a mailbox on the road while we were headed for the next town. Shoot, the white papers wouldn't run our scores anyway. Stats weren't consistently kept until later, after Jackie Robinson went up to the majors.